Okay, Lucy, we're up and running.
Okay.
Yeah, so good evening, everybody. We'll maybe make a tiny bit of a slow start. We give people another few seconds to start arriving because these things always take a moment or two for people to land, right? But I'll introduce us anyway. So my name is Emmett Major. I'm the coordinator of the Planet Youth program in the west of Ireland. And Lucy, do you want to introduce yourself?
I can do. I'm Lucy Wolfe. I'm a sleep consultant and co-creational relationship mentor and author of the Baby Sleep Solution and all about the Baby Sleep Solution as well.
So Lucy's here to be our our expert, our subject matter expert in the area of sleep, and she's prepared some material particularly for parents that have children of national school age. And I'm here just to really introduce her. I'm going to talk a tiny little bit at the outset about Planet Youth, which is to a degree why we're all here. So I'm going to explain that very quickly. Then I'm going to hand you over to Lucy. You'll see very little of me after that, other than I'm going to be here in the background fielding questions. I'll be monitoring the chat. And what I'll be trying to do is gather up any questions that people want to put to Lucy, and we'll try to put those to Lucy at the end. The plan at the absolute latest, we're going to be finishing up at 8:15. So we scheduled for 9 until 8:15. We'll maybe even try and get out a little bit ahead of that. It's definitely going to finish at 8:15, whatever happens. But I know we're competing with the Bake Off final at 8 o'clock, so people might have a half an eye on that. So that's more or less it. I'm going to just share my screen here quickly if I can find the right buttons. Here we go. And share this screen. Share. So hopefully you're now looking at this colorful image here of some happy young people, right? And this is the Planet Youth website. You'll find anything you need to know about the overall project at www.planetyouth.ie. And this is a program we've been working on here in the west of Ireland, going there with Roscommon since 2018, which is the localized or regional local implementation here in Ireland of the Icelandic primary prevention model. Okay, so I'll tell you a tiny bit more about it in a second, right? So what is Planet Youth? It's a public health program that's designed to improve long-term health and life outcomes for all of our school-going population. So children that are in secondary school, but also children within our national school system. And it's supported by most of the big statutory bodies over in the west of Ireland. You'll recognise some of the logos like the HSE and TUSLA and things like that. But our local councils, our education training board. So it's an interagency project with the backing of all the major statutory bodies in this part of the world. Okay, so every 2 years, what we do is we survey all of the teenagers at 15 and 16 years old in our schools. We have 91 schools in our 3 counties. They all sit down every 2 years and they fill in the Planet Youth questionnaire, which is very, very detailed look at their lives. It's a 28-page document. The first 2 surveys were. The third will be online. And it asks them all about their lives, from life at home, life in school, life online, sports and hobbies, substance use, mental health, physical activity, and on it goes. It's quite a thorough document. It's 28 pages in total. It takes them nearly an hour to do, so it's quite a slog. But the whole idea is that we're gathering up an awful lot of information about how our kids are getting on, right? You can see it's a big kind of logistical undertaking. Those are the boxes on the palette in the bottom right that used to go to Iceland to be optically scanned. And what we're trying to find out, right, is what's going in their lives going on so that we can look at the risk and protective factors in these 4 big domains, right? So these are parents and family, what's happening at home, their peer group, so what are their friends up to, because broadly speaking, they'll be doing similar things to their friends. Their leisure time is what are they doing in their extracurricular time outside of school. And their school experience is hugely important as well, right? So that's a little bit what we're trying to find out, okay? So we're taking the story of the young people at 15 and 16, but the idea of it is we're trying to develop improvements in interventions that will improve the landscape for the children that are growing up behind them, if that makes sense. So it's the children that are starting out life in secondary at 12 and 13 years old, but increasingly the project is having a focus on our children as they're starting out life in our national schools at 4 and 5 years old, right? So when they're starting into junior infants, this is really where we need to be bringing more influence to bear, because it's at this age and parents at this age that you can begin to start to make, huge improvements that will pay off over time. Okay, so in Iceland, what they managed to do with this idea called primary prevention, where you prevent problems arising rather than fixing problems after they happen, by making lots of little small improvements in those 4 big areas, right? And they managed to go from having the highest substance use rates in the world at the time when they started to the lowest currently, and they've kept them at the lowest for the last decade now. Along the way, lots of other things improved and changed, and they have a very dynamic young population now because of it. So here in Ireland, what we will be doing is using this approach that they developed in Iceland and hopefully improving it somewhat, emulating it certainly, and trying to look at areas that we can improve the health and well-being of our young people. And some things that we will be looking at are on the screen here. So alcohol and substance use, we're interested in that certainly. Physical activity, screen use, or mental health, there's some concerns there. And sleep is one of the things we want to look at, which is what we're here to do tonight, okay? So a lot of the information that we gather is produced in our county reports. You'll see here the Mayo, the Galway, the Roscommon reports. And one of the big pieces of work that was done almost at the outset of this project was developing information from these 15 and 16-year-olds and bringing it back to the parents of the children who are 12 and 13. So in first year, all of the first year schools, in our region, we've, as I say, 91 schools. This booklet and the fridge magnet for bedtimes gets distributed out to about 7,000 parents incoming every year in September and October. And on top of that, then, just this year, we started the distribution of this new booklet called the Parent Power booklet, which goes to, there's 20,000 of these went out to our 440 national schools through the spring last year. And every September, October, November, there'll be another 6,000 or 7,000 go out to all of those incoming junior infant parents every year. So everybody's getting the same information over time. And what it's kind of looking at is things like family time. How do we make improvements there? It's just the idea of getting good routines in early. I hope this is all making sense to you. And the idea is you sit down, maybe go through this with your 4 or 5-year-old. What are we doing well? What would we like to do better? It talks here a little bit about sleep and bedtimes as well. Nobody really knows. We tend to do, roughly speaking, what our parents did. Or maybe, we don't go too far for parenting advice. We kind of wing it a little. But so these were the kind of guidelines around bedtime, good bedtime routines, relaxing before bed. And then we talk about screen use as well, significant problem. And then we talk about introducing to hobbies and sports. And this is one of the things they did so very well in Iceland, was develop this extracurricular space for their young people and fund it. And they made a very, very significant investment in infrastructure and activities for young people, which has, been very significant up there. So something that we'll be pursuing here. But the idea is, can we get our young people introduced to a wider variety of interests at a young age? Because that will sustain them then through their teen years a bit more. Making changes at home, that's kind of introduced as an idea, just if there's some things you want to improve. And then parents working together is one thing that we're absolutely trying to develop here more as an idea, because it's something that did work very well in Iceland, where parents, there's a sort of parental consensus program where by parents agreeing certain things together, it has a huge amount of power. So, for example, junior infant parents incoming to a national school, there might be 10 in a class or 20 or even 30 in a very large school. They can all agree at the outset. They've 8 years ahead. They could agree simple agreements on things like, well, nobody's going to get a phone until secondary, as for an example. And immediately the pressure's off everybody if everybody just does that, right? Because the first, child that comes in at 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 with the phone, everybody's under pressure. Could be the 5-year birthday party. It could be, things around homework or all sorts. It's up to parents to decide. But the idea that the more parents actually support each other and work together as they come through national school, and that's something we're trying to, develop in our national schools and secondary schools out here in our part of the country. So there's a website devoted to the project called the Parent Power website, which is, again, it's accessible with planetyouth.ie. And I'm going to come back around, a long way around, really, but I want to come back around to the sleep here a little bit, right? Because that's what we're here to talk about tonight. And one of the big reasons that we did want to do this, and we did this similar kind of webinars about this time last year, we really noticed in the second survey, right? The second survey, this sort of stood out a lot more than the first one, even though it was apparent in the first one. We kind of missed it, right? But in the 2020 Planet Youth survey, it came through very strongly that the children, the teenagers, now these are 15 to 16-year-olds, weren't sleeping like anything like enough, right? So this is what they told us in the second survey. Only 10% of them are getting about the right amount of sleep. 41% of them are doing okay. And everybody else to the right there, the 35, 16, the 8, adds up to 59% of them are not getting enough sleep or anything like it, actually, quite a lot of them. But more interestingly, when you then correlate this, okay, against these other categories in their life. So this is the correlation that you would see if you compare the sleep for their mental health. So these are the children that would report good or very good mental health correlated with the sleep. So you can see immediately the children that are getting 8 or 9 hours sleep are far more likely to report positive mental health than the ones who aren't, right? The same thing would apply to a category called school engagement. It's a sort of validated scale around being able for school, for enjoying school, is probably the best way to put it. But it's this 10-question scale. When you add it up, it's called school engagement scale. But you can see again, the children who are sleeping properly are far more inclined to report high levels of school engagement. Okay, and this same pattern, exact same pattern, would hold up across all of the information practically that we ask the kids. So if it was, for example, self-image, self-esteem, physical health, stress, anxiety, school work, for example, every category is very, very closely tied into the amount of sleep that they're getting. So what we did want to do in this latest survey, so the next version, this is biennial, this every 2 years we do the survey. The third of these surveys, the 2022 version of the survey, is actually running right now. So it started last Monday on the 7th of November. It's running until the end of November. So it's running over about a 3-week period. And all of the schools in our region are administering the Next Planet Youth Survey in an online format this time. So it's not the old paper-based. We've moved to a kind of a more modern version of doing this using computers and so on. So one of the things it gave us the opportunity to do was introduce a little bit more of an examination about this topic. So the previous 2 surveys asked that top question, how many hours do you sleep on average every night? Whereas this new questionnaire is asking them, as well as that first question, is asking them what time they usually go to bed, what time they usually get to sleep, which isn't, of course, the same thing, what time they have to get up on a school day, do you ever feel tired during the school day, and do you ever fall asleep during the school day, right? So all of this data is coming in, and we're getting a really good look at it. Around 3,000 of an anticipated 5,000 young people that participate, about 3,000 of them have done the survey so far, and another 2,000 will be doing it over the next couple of weeks. So I would be premature to talk very much about what they're saying, other than to say the picture in this space is kind of bleak. It's showing pretty much the same thing as what we saw 2 years ago. And an awful lot of them, actually, I wrote down a few things. So when it was 59% of them at 7 hours or less 2 years ago, it's 55.6 of them this time, right? So it hasn't improved a lot post-COVID. 48.2% of our kids are getting to sleep after midnight. These are 15 to 16-year-olds in school, so they shouldn't be up out that late. And the last question there, do you have a phone in your bedroom at night, is one of the things we're really key and interested to find out. So that figure is here, probably won't surprise you. So 84.5% of these teenagers at 15 or 16 are going to bed with a phone in their bedroom, which of course is disaster, because as adults we can't really self-regulate with our phones very well. They're addictive. And if a child has a phone in their bedroom that's going chirp or burp or buzz or beep, or Snapchats are coming in or whatever it is, they are not able to ignore that, right? And so by having the phones in their bedrooms, it's just a recipe for disaster. And that's what's driving quite a lot of the problems we're seeing around this lack of sleep. So what to do about that, right? It's as a bunch of national school parents, which is our audience here tonight, we would absolutely have the opportunity to do something about this, because most of you haven't, I don't imagine, introduced the phone yet. So it's something that we're trying to do as part of the Parent Power Project here, and as part of the whole program, is by parents agreeing. So if everybody said, well, the phone is handed up to be charged at 8 o'clock in first year and 8:30 in second year, and you can negotiate around that, of course, right? But if it was something that it's hard to introduce when a child is 15 or 16 or 17, you'd have to pry it out of their fist, a cold dead fist kind of a thing. But as a young person getting their phone for the first time at confirmation or in 6th class, and that rule is introduced at that point, that's fine. You know, they'll accept that. That's the sort of thing that you can work with and negotiate as they're getting a little bit older. So just something I thought I'd show you, and it's not necessarily the focus of what we're going to be talking about tonight, but it is the reason why we're here, that I wanted to try and hopefully respond a little bit more to this. And as parents of national school children, you're a little bit forewarned and forearmed now, I suppose. And Lucy's going to tell us an awful lot more about the whole topic. And this would be more focused on all sorts of aspects of sleep, whether it's sleep problems and all these sort of things. So I'm going to shut up with that. I've gone on a fair bit probably as it is, but I hope you found it interesting. Stop screen sharing. What I will say though, before I hand over to Lucy, is what when the kind of advertising, I suppose, of the social media went out about tonight, I was encouraging people to say we will be taking questions on chat. So I'll monitor that. You can submit questions on chat. If you want, I'll be doing my best to put them aside and we'll ask Lucy then at the end. Or if you want to, let me share one last thing, actually, go back to this quickly. Share, right? If you want to send in an email to me, so it doesn't come up in the chat, if that makes sense, I'll be monitoring this email address as well. So it's the info@planetyouth.ie. And I know that people have already submitted some questions over the last few days or so, so I'll be trying to put those to Lucy as well at the end. So yeah, like I say, you can put a question up in chat, or you can send me an email on info@planetyouth.ie, and we'll do our best to get to them at the end. So that's it. Enough for me. I'll hand you over to Lucy, and thank you very much indeed. Now, over to you, Lucy.
Thank you, Emmett. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us. There's so to tell you, I'm a mum of 4 children as well. And I guess I try as a practitioner and a parent to fuse the information together that might be helpful to you. Just to put that in context, my oldest child is 20 and my youngest child is 12. So I've been through some of what maybe you are experiencing, and hopefully tonight I will be able to cover some information that will help you understand potentially what you're experiencing, and then more importantly, maybe what things that you might be able to do to start to move the needle in the right direction to help you and your family sleep a little bit better. Lots of questions are coming in around the recording, and I know that will be available. I also will make the slides available, and any breathing exercises and body scan exercises that I mentioned, will also make sure that they're available to you as well. First of all, I want you to know that sleep is super, super important, and it's really important to ensure that enough sleep, because when the brain is sleeping, the body is repairing and restoring. Day-to-day perspective for reduced alertness, daytime sleepiness, low mood, lack of motivation, poor decision, lack of creativity, increased risk of negative thought patterns. Oh, Emmett, people saying sound not great. Anybody else having that issue? Emmett, give me a thumbs up or thumbs down.
It was a little bit choppy for a while. It's improved a bit. I'm not sure if there's anybody in the house on the broadband or that kind of thing. Might be tying resources up a bit, but
well, as you know, we did have a few issues as we began, and we changed I changed what I was working from.
Yeah.
For a signal. Yeah. What do you want to do?
Well, I can have you. I'm hearing you just fine at the moment, but other people are saying, I can see here the noise not great.
I might go back to what I usually use, Emmett.
Yeah.
Dial into the meeting that way or not.
Okay, give it a try. Give it a try. Okay.
I'll stay in this meeting though, because we don't want the continuity of it to change, do we?
You probably get feedback on 2 devices. That's the only thing.
You're going to do for a second.
No, actually, most of the messages are saying it's okay now, Lucy. It's okay.
Yeah,
it's
like
okay.
I mean, I've got 5G broadband here. Normally, if there's a problem, it's not on my end, if I'm totally honest with you.
That's fine. Work away. Most people are seeing it seems to be able to improve. So hopefully.
Okay. All right, let's keep going. So I suppose essentially I was just trying to explain that when we're not sleeping well, we're at a risk. Our children are at risk. We as individuals are at risk. Poor judgment, less creativity, and long term we have higher risk of depression, heart disease, diabetes, some cancers, and things like that. So I suppose it's really important that we put emphasis on how our children experience their sleep and the quality of the sleep that they get and the amount of sleep that they get as well. Falling asleep and staying asleep and napping when that is age relevant is all rooted in your child's biology. And just like language and motor skills, sleep matures over the first years of your child's life. And as your child grows, the patterns and the physiology of their sleep will change. If we can briefly understand what's going on in the brain and the body, that will help you to better support your child's sleep development. So as your child is growing, there are two main processes that begin to regulate their sleep: the homeostatic sleep drive and the circadian rhythm. And just really briefly, if I get you to think of the homeostatic sleep drive, is the pressure that builds the longer that you are awake, and when we sleep, it is released. So it's often described as a balloon that gets blown up, and when the balloon is full, then we go to sleep, and that deflates the balloon. So that's your homeostatic sleep drive. And then the other system that regulates the child's sleep is the circadian rhythm. And it's a powerful internal clock that's nestled in the brain, and it controls the circadian rhythm, and it allows us to initiate the light and the dark pattern of day and night. And it sends messages on a 24-hour basis that influences our wake patterns. When the two systems interact and influence, or when they interact with each other, they influence when and how long your child sleeps. And the best quality of sleep happens when these two systems are in sync with each other. And I suppose then a lot of you have a basic understanding that there are two types of sleep. There is REM sleep and non-REM sleep. Non-REM sleep has 3 stages of its own that we tend to transition through, which means ultimately we transition through 4 stages of sleep throughout the course of the night on an alternating basis. And essentially the brain goes into a deep sleep and it transitions through those phases throughout the course of the night. And as it does that, it often has, or it does have, partial arousals. And it's at these points that sometimes we see disrupted sleep, because sometimes influences how well they can maintain their sleep. And basically, you will always hear people talk about waking in the night as being biologically normal, and it is, but it is biologically normal to transition through the sleep phases without disturbance or without waking or signaling for the parent. And I guess often when we struggle with our children's sleep, it's that transition piece that is part of the challenge. In terms of the amount of sleep that our children need in this age cohort, so between 3 and 5 years, we're looking at between 10 and 14 hours, and there are often naps embedded in that age profile. But let's say from 6 to 12 years, which I'm guessing is the majority of the parents present here tonight, the amount of sleep our children require is between 9 and 11 hours. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that as the evening unfolds. Common sleep difficulties that parents experience, and this is not an exhaustive list, but essentially parents often report trouble falling asleep, that their children resist bedtime, they seem to prefer a later bedtime, they wake up at night, they wake up for long periods of time overnight, they are restless, they have early morning waking, and they report that they are not feeling well rested. Recent studies have reported an overall prevalence of significant parent-reported sleep problems, with almost 40% of parents in this age group struggling, with up to 25% reporting this resistance and 10% of you reporting significant onset delay and anxiety, and teachers reporting daytime sleepiness. So just to give you an idea of what is happening out there. More importantly, I want you to start to understand what influences your child's sleep. And like most childhood developmental processes, sleep itself is multidimensional, with many force factors impacting the sleep experience and your child's sleep patterns. the best way I could describe to you is to say that everything your child thinks and feels, everything they see and do, everything they hear, everything they eat and drink affects their sleep. Everything the parent thinks and feels, sees and does also influences the child's sleep. So essentially emotional, environmental, psychological, physiological, and so on. And for me, I might describe it as saying it's all about relationship. It's about the relationship with their sleep, with their parent, with themselves. It's going to be do with their relationship with their environment, their sleep environment, their activity, their food, the emotional and physical temperature, texture, sense, noise, and so on. And of course, the parent's relationship with themselves has an influence on how our children understand their holding world of home and school and community. And I guess just to mention that there are further factors that are outside the scope of this presentation that may include underlying medical issues, upper respiratory issues, food sensitivities, intolerances, dental issues, sleep apnea, sleep disordered breathing. Now, I mentioned them, but I will also suggest that they're outside the scope of what we're talking about tonight. It's important for us to be aware that there are so many things that do impact children's sleep. And often we have to become detectives trying to figure out what is contributing to what. I want you to know that sleep itself has these two major design properties, and studies demonstrate that certain dynamics contribute in both a positive and a negative way to our children's sleep pattern and profile. The first being sleep associations, and that might be described by me as how your child experiences their sleep, considering what conditions do they need to get to sleep, and what conditions do they need to maintain their sleep. Because very often, when there are associations around sleep, the child is not doing for themselves, that often impacts their ability to get to sleep with ease, and obviously their ability to maintain their sleep. And you'll recall earlier we talked about transitioning through sleep phases, and that's where we often see challenges around that. Biological timekeeping. So that's back to that circadian rhythm, but just breaking it down into real terms, the time your child wakes, their bedtime, what time they go to sleep at, and if these times vary on a day-by-day basis, and are they coordinated with the internal body clock? Children who are overtired, and overtiredness comes from loads of areas. So it comes from not getting sleep on time. It comes from having to wake earlier than they're ready to wake. It comes from waking throughout the course of the night. And when children are overtired, their body has a chemical response of cortisol and adrenaline, and that has two main little jobs. It can make it difficult to get to sleep, which is why we often see a lot of resistance. And you heard those figures earlier. And also it can make it difficult for your child to stay asleep. And I suppose that's the area that we focus on. So if I break that down a little bit more for you and suggest that common causes of sleep challenges are potentially overtiredness, not being tired enough, being overstimulated, that possibly they have what I might describe as being inadequately prepared for bedtime, which makes it hard to transition to sleep. When we have irregularity, late wake times, or bedtimes that change throughout the course of the week, if the sleep environment is not sleep friendly or conducive to sleep, if they need a parent present or some things to help them get to sleep, it makes it difficult for them to maintain their sleep. If conditions change after your child has gone to sleep, and that could be something as small as playing music that then goes off. It's no longer playing as the brain transitions through the sleep phases. Again, it may encourage nighttime activity. Of course, we acknowledge that fears, stress, anxiety all also contribute to sleep challenges. If the sleep location changes overnight, so if they fall asleep on the couch and then they're transferred to the bed, that also can give us a disrupted sleep. If within this context of addressing your child's sleep, we end up being unpredictable, that further may fuel a disrupted sleep cycle as well. So I touched on this briefly, but I just want to talk to you about bedtime, the time your child is going to bed. As your child gets older, their bedtime gets a little bit more elusive. So with children up to around 8 years of age, their bedtime is actually a bit more defined, and it might range anywhere between kind of 7 and 8:30 p.m. And as your child gets older, that becomes more individual. And of course, it will depend on many factors. So we know as your child is getting older, and we know this from studies as well, that parents appear to become less boundary focused around bed timing. And that this can in turn lead to more severe challenges around the onset of sleep. And of course, around adolescence as social jet lag and school demands increase alongside physical and hormonal and psychological shifts. So if we're talking about how do we help establish bedtime, I guess there's a couple of ways that we can look at it. First of all, I'll encourage you to observe and to try and follow your child's lead. And that may mean assessing their mood and behavior, but also trying to figure out the difference between getting tired and becoming overtired. Getting tired is often really brief. And of course, as your child gets older, you may only start to see late sleep cues. And that, for the older child, this age range that we're talking about tonight, could be like giddy behavior. It may be clumsy, hyperactivity, and of course it could be obvious as needing to slow down. But I guess I'm interested in trying to see, what your child might do around becoming tired and versus overtired. With children under the age of 8 or 9, you can generally assume that an earlier bedtime is nearly always required. And sometimes to establish bedtime, starting the process as early as 6:30 can help parents discover what their natural bedtime might be over a few nights. But this approach does get less effective as your child gets older. I think if we can work backwards from their wake time, calculating how much sleep they need, this 9 to 11 hours, that can sometimes also be helpful, that if they must be awake by a certain time in the morning. And I just see there about quality of the call. I'm hoping that for the majority of you that you can hear and the quality is good enough for you. But basically calculating backwards from the amount of sleep that your child needs. So, for example, if routinely your child needs to be up at 7, and even if they were to get, the in-between time of, let's say, 10 hours, then they would need to be asleep by 9 p.m. in order to do that. And I suppose in some ways, as a practitioner, I do discourage focusing hugely on hours of sleep. But I am interested in the ease with which it takes to get your child to sleep. Anecdotally, we often hear that taking 10 to 15 minutes to get to sleep as being a good sign. In practice, I would suggest that somewhere between 10 and 40 minutes would be a good range, and that sometimes expecting our children to go to sleep very quickly, it can be a little bit unrealistic. But again, just to kind of bear those numbers in mind. And then if your child was falling asleep within about 40 minutes, I would actually consider that to be quite good and something that could be continued to be worked on. When getting to sleep is the biggest problem that parents experience, we often work just on getting them to go asleep with ease at the later time, and then slowly bringing that later time forward in an effort to establish some of the other principles around getting to sleep and then in turn staying asleep. So you can hear that I'm not prescribing a bedtime for any one individual, but I am encouraging you to begin to be curious and work backwards and start to look at how long is it taking and what are the other things that we can do to support your child getting sleep with greater ease and of course staying asleep as well. So in terms of putting those steps in place, I think it's really important that we define and decide where you want your child to sleep, so that where they fall asleep, ideally, is where they will wake, and that you demonstrate this in your words and your actions so that we don't change things too much, especially when we're looking to promote a more consolidated, higher quality and less interrupted sleep for the family. And of course, I mentioned it briefly, but I will say it again, that a suitable sleep-friendly environment is really important. So we're looking at quiet, we're looking at dark, we're looking at cool and comfortable. And remember, let's say, when was the last time you replaced the mattress? To think about the bedding, the pillow, the disturbances, the siblings, the pets, and what else may also be contributing. And to remember about things remaining constant. So if you play music when they get to sleep, understand that the brain is going to seek this out in an effort to help them go back to sleep. So, because it's about remaining safe in the context of your sleep. So essentially, to encourage positive sleep practices, we need whatever is happening for your child when they get to sleep to be able to be continued throughout the course of the night. So that typically is without music, without white noise. But however, if you are going to play something, white noise is actually better than music. And of course, there's a few other things that I'll get you to do to also help, but I want you to start thinking about these bits and pieces in order to help you move forward. Regularity is really important to help the circadian rhythm that we spoke about earlier. So having a regular wake time between 6 and no later than 7:30 a.m. can be very helpful to improve the bedtime and to start to ensure that your child gets enough sleep. It's important that we try to avoid variation even on the weekend, especially when we feel our child's sleep needs to be worked on. So that can be difficult because often on the weekend, it's the only time that maybe we get a chance to get more sleep. But if we have that variation, we often contribute further to the dysregulation of that circadian rhythm. And again, when we wake, it's important that we have a post-sleep ritual and that we have that moment in the morning for connection and a calm start to each day as well. So a bedtime routine, we're always hearing about that, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, but a wake routine is just as important. Embedded in that wake routine, we can expose them to bright and natural light first thing in the morning, and then encourage that we have good outside activity and fresh air, and that towards the end of the day, we avoid strenuous activity and sports too close to sleep time. And I know that often is a big problem with training happening in the evening time, and then it's difficult for our children to get to sleep because they've been training or overstimulated at the very least. The general recommendation is try to avoid that level of activity 2 to 3 hours before bedtime. So just kind of start to put this in the context of what might be happening within your household. Bright and natural light exposure has positive implications for your child's sleeping pattern, and so too in initiating the darker environment as sleep approaches. Obviously, it's important that we create regular feeding times, regular meals, getting enough to eat, getting enough to drink. And obviously there are anti-sleep foods as well. So, caffeine, stimulants, high processed food, refined carbohydrates. And also I'd get you to consider, and I know there's a message in the chat there about foods that promote sleep. And again, I'll include them in the slides. And we won't have enough time to go through all of that, but there obviously are things that we can do to keep improving things for our young children. So regularity with meals, avoiding heavy meals too close to sleep time, giving our digestive tract a chance to relax. And the other couple of points I'll get you to think about is avoiding high sugar and looking for hidden sugar in the diet. I'll also get you to consider vitamin supplements. And if you are doing them, you would do them early in the day rather than close to sleep time. If your children are using inhalers, make sure you use them at least an hour before bedtime as well, in an effort to keep helping promote your young child's sleep profile in this context. Furthermore, and I know Emma touched on this earlier, but avoid television and electronics at least an hour before bedtime. And I suppose in this primary school cohort, it's an ideal opportunity for you to set a loving boundary around this. This is the time to do it. You can take habit years so that you can reduce vulnerability later on to challenges that parents experience. which are often, a springboard from what some of you might be experiencing even at the moment. Late sleep onset, sleep deprivation, and lost sleep are all attributed to gadget use and exposure. If for some reason your children do have electronics in the bedroom, so they have a desktop computer, it's important to maybe even put them to sleep. Make sure you cover them up, because sometimes the lights coming off the mouse and coming off the desktop itself can also impact your child's sleep. Lots of sleep professionals talk about creating a cave-like environment in the bedroom. I sometimes think in this age, cave-like environment we do want it to be dark, blackout blinds, nightlight is also very good to kind of help them still feel secure. I often feel young children want to be able to see and hear that they're okay, so just kind of work on that. And one thing I will also mention is that sometimes having drinks as part of the bedtime routine, drinks of water, drinks of milk, too close to sleep time, can actually have an impact on your child's sleep profile. Sometimes the drink can recharge the battery and make it hard for your child to get to sleep. And sometimes having the drink can also impact their ability to stay asleep overnight. So I would always try and have drinks finished about 45 minutes before bedtime is going to begin. Obviously, embedded in all of this, open communication and active listening are really important as you introduce any changes. You maybe have a family meeting and to help show your child that you're introducing changes, and that you also have a collaboration with your child, that you engage and you trust them with the changes that you're making. And again, those changes come back around to identifying the suitable bedtime. What time is bedtime, lights out time, maybe meant to be in your house, okay? And then I work backwards further. So you need to start preparing for bedtime 1 to 1.5 hours before the time that you want your child to get to sleep by. And this can help to build a bridge towards achieving sleep. So there's two parts of it, actually. You've got a wind down that might happen maybe an hour or so before lights out. And then you have a bedtime routine that happens in the bedroom. So there's two parts to it. So before we ever go upstairs to get ready for bed, it's a good idea to begin to slow things down, to almost start to put the house to sleep. It's dark now anyway, but darken things down, low level things, use lamps rather than overhead lights, and start to create an opportunity to begin to wind down. So I might call these calming activities, and I am going to suggest that we do these an hour or more before the bedtime routine itself begins. Lots of questions are coming in about how do you help your child get to sleep with greater ease, and these are the stacking blocks that we begin to use to try and help that. So you have a 2-part bedtime routine, something that happens maybe in the living space, and this can be a family effort. It doesn't have to be one child, and I'm very aware that lots of you will have more than one child anyway. But think about this 2-prong bedtime routine where you have a winding activity in the living space. That might mean listening to music. It might mean reading, word searches, crosswords, colouring, drawing, puzzles, jigsaws, or just family time where we are just putting away all the gadgets and just beginning to connect and slow down. Remember, it is the deep-seated need of each person, each child, to feel seen, heard, loved, safe, secure, and belonging to your family unit. And the way that we continue to foster that, as well as all the other things that you're doing, is creating this warm, loving, attentive, responsive family culture. Both honors your child's individuality and allows them lots of opportunities to connect and engage with you in your loving presence. So really ensuring that both we're spending lots of one-to-one time with our children, and also that we're allowing that active listening to happen, lots of physical contact, lots of eye contact, because this is the big building block to that wind down before we ever get up to the bedroom to do bedtime routine. And I suppose our modelling of, phones and distractions also is part of how we show them how to begin this wind down process. So I see someone there in the chat has asked what time about dinner. We like about 2 hours for the digestive tract to begin to relax and then you can move into your wind down, and then you can move into the higher grade of the actual bedtime routine itself. So it's 2-part. I know I've said that already, but I just want to reiterate, it's a 2-part wind down. One part that happens maybe an hour or more before proposed lights out time, and then another bedtime routine that happens maybe 20 or 30 minutes before lights out. So you add those together, and then the bedtime itself, it depends on a couple of things. It depends on how old your child is and how the ratio of parent directed and self-directed for your young child. So there are a few important characteristics for your bedtime routine in the bedroom itself. It should happen in the bedroom, post your bath, your shower, your teeth, your face, your hands, wash up, if you're doing those items. And then into the bedroom, and it happens not on the bed. It is important that the bed itself, as much as possible, is reserved for sleep. If study or games are happening in the bedroom, try to create a defined space for this, or hangout area, so that the bed function is promoted to indicate to the brain that this is where I sleep, so that we're really building this in as best as possible. It's helpful for some children if you use visual aids to support bedtime, checklists, storyboards, lamps on timers, a bedtime zone in the bedroom. So often I lay out a rug on the floor, cushions, a space on the floor where we're going to do bedtime. And again, I know this is much more suitable for a slightly younger child, but the idea is that you keep building on it. But however, your sequence of your bedtime routine, that it's logical and it's linear, and it leads to getting into bed, and that there's lots of opportunity for connection with the parent when that's applicable. It's important that we have the same ritual each night, because you're creating a process. You are creating opportunities for the learning and also connection, but we gain by predictability. So limit the bedtime activities that happen in the bedroom, the bedtime routine, 2 to 6 items, so that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I will reiterate that it's important that you decide as the parent, based on your child's age and their stage, how much is parent attended and how much of this is self-directed. And that will completely depend on your child. I think it's really important that within it, you create lots of opportunity for your child's involvement and their own sense of control, of choices and engagements and decisions around what we do when we do it. And that within that, then we are continuing to make space for that individuality. When it's lights out time, so this would be after you've done maybe, and 40 minutes to an hour of wind down downstairs, 20 to 30 minutes in the bedroom itself, with the ratio split between parent and self-directed depending on your preference and your child's age. And then when the lights go out, of course, then you're looking to help your child get to sleep. So again, some of you will be able to do this and leave the room, and some of you will still be staying with your children to get them to go to sleep, that that's the need that they're presenting with. I have mentioned briefly earlier that anxiety and stress make up a big part of resistance to sleep. And it is important as parents that we can get to the source of the anxiety, be it social anxiety, and be it something to do with what's happening in school or at home, and that we're giving our child lots of opportunities to discuss this, to write about it, to draw about it, to be heard around what's happening for them. And then obviously building in all this winding down and relaxation in advance of sleep. And then moving towards how do you help your child get to sleep on their own at bedtime, which then helps reduce the vulnerability, the nighttime waking. It doesn't stop it completely, but it can help with that. If your child is reliant on parent presence at bedtime, I begin making all of these adjustments. And if you're changing things like removing drinks, holding hands, laying with your child, or having them sleep in a bed rather than on a sofa at bedtime, then I use my stay and support approach. So you've built in all the tenets of the the suggestions that I am suggesting to you this evening. And then when lights go out, I sit on the floor and I support your child from the bedside. So rather than laying on the bed with them, I begin with creating that separation between, honoring their bed as being for them, and that I'll support them from the sideline, essentially. And within that support, you're very available to them in both a physical and an emotional way, and you're encouraging them and supporting them to get to sleep with you beside them. And then it is a staged-based approach that ultimately you move through stages as the days and the weeks unfold. So, for example, you may spend up to a week beside the bed and then move into the middle of the room and then move out of the bedroom over the course of time. Whilst you're doing that, you may also be trying to establish what time is bedtime supposed to be. I briefly touched on earlier about not prescribing a bedtime per se, but you can hear that there are some ways of you working out what bedtime might need to be. You can base it on their wake time and do the backward math. You can observe them and see when you think they're actively tired, or you could take your lead from what time they easily get to sleep and work your way backwards. But within that, you start to build in these relaxation and winding down activities. And again, to mention one more time about the food, the diet, regular meals, hydration, outside exercise and fresh air, using light to help regulate their sleeping pattern and profile, but also using the darkness to help initiate the sleep hormone melatonin as the evening unfolds. Some children don't need you to stay with them at bedtime, but they do call you back lots, or they find it really difficult to get to sleep. And sometimes staying with them can help that. And slowly moving out of the room is one way of doing that. And I see, Amy, you've asked, do you announce that you're going to leave the room when you've moved through the stages? I think because of the age group that we're talking about, it's really important that we help our children understand what's happening so that they're deeply involved in a process of learning. So that if you were beginning to use a sleep learning approach like the stay and support approach, you would sit beside them for the first week, but then show them after a couple of days, here's where I'm going to sit tonight when you're going to sleep. And I might use a cushion as a marker today so they can see it. And I'll keep explaining to them where I'm going to be, and I'll help them in that capacity. And then I do that again. And then I get to a stage where I'm going out of the room and I might say to them, I'm going to the bathroom, but I'm going to come back and check on you. Or I am going to change into my slippers, or I'm going to put on my running gear. I'm going to come back and check on you. So you slowly ease yourself out. And the hope is that as you work through this, you can start to see it taking shorter, your child to get to sleep, or they need you less as they're getting to sleep. And again, you can begin to either move your bedtime later to accommodate that, or you can obviously move it earlier, depending on the signals that they are showing you. Some parents can leave and come back on a time basis to reassure and affirm your child, with the aim of ultimately discontinuing the return visits as they become more safe and secure in the context of their sleep. I guess with any changes that we make with our children's sleep, we then repeat through the night, because a lot of the problems that exist at this stage are that they come into your bedroom in the overnight period. The first thing you have to look at is what do they need to get to sleep, and clean as you go. And then obviously work on when they come into the bed, if you no longer want to share the bed with them, that you help them return to their bed. And again, you use the stay and support approach through the overnight. It's working on the overnight that tends to take a lot of time for parents. Any work that we do on our children's sleep and introducing new concepts of ways of being absolutely take time and patience on everyone's part. Keeping a sleep journal for both of you can be really helpful, so you can start to see the times, how long it's taking, what's helping and what's not helping. And I suppose just to be understanding of how difficult it can be for our children when we introduce new and different things, and when sleep itself is a challenge for them. I do really encourage you to be kind to yourself, be patient with each other and confident. It will help you be predictable and to continue to encourage you to nourish sleep for your family. But I always want you to be really positive about sleep, because we want our kids to ultimately want to sleep, to have a good relationship with sleep, to love and to welcome it. And if we can foster a positive relationship with both sleep and within themselves, then we can help elevate things. Yes, as I mentioned, it can mean a lot of patience on your part, but do resist the urge to use punishment or rewards or restrictions in an effort to try and promote your sleep. Whilst I'm aware that can obviously help, I'm also aware that it can lower the self-esteem too, and ultimately not move you into the area that you would like to be in. And I suppose we're looking for the right emotional and environmental temperature to be correct. And we align it then with the timing. Obviously, additional issues will occur. I mentioned this briefly, that you may have more than one child. You have a competition of needs in the evening. Some of you will be parenting on your own. And again, all of these things can add to the mix. But again, you can get a sense of the essence of some things that you could start to do and adjust and change, help and foster that positivity around sleep in your family unit. Now, I'm going to open the floor to questions. I know, Emmett, you're going to help moderate that on your end, and we'll see what we can cover before we go. Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions came in right the way throughout in chat. So, forgive me now if some of these you've sort of covered as we went along, because I'm trying.
It's okay, but it's good that we can kind of get underneath some of the things that have cropped up. People.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a couple of things that came in early in the email. So I'll just send my 8.5-year-old daughter is waking in the middle of the night with bad dreams and finds it difficult to go back to sleep. She's the youngest of 3, and it is hard to get her to sleep before 9 p.m. Even then, she rarely sleep before 9:30 or 10, which is far too late. She's tired during the day, and I know she needs more sleep, but if she goes to bed at 8:30, it takes her longer to settle her, and it ends up being even later night. Her siblings being well settled by 8:30. Any help would be, so it's kind of not enough sleep and bad dreams.
Yeah, and I suppose they're probably interrelated, that we have a higher vulnerability to, disturbed sleep, and if that's bad dreams. Now, don't forget, those bad dreams, there's a source behind them potentially as well, but if we just distill it and keep it to sleep, it's probably because of overtiredness. And look, she's the youngest of 3, and I know myself from having 4 children that often, as our children get older, the house is alive a lot later because of the older children, and then that can mean it's more difficult for the younger cohort to get sleep around the time that they need to, because it's taking her so long to get to sleep, and because it also is showing you that she's not getting enough sleep by her mood and behavior. I'd actually start with a really early bedtime. And again, this would take a little bit of effort because your house will probably be busy. I might start preparing for bed around 6:30 or so, and begin this long lead in that we've talked about this evening, because that potentially will help you establish what her natural bedtime potentially is, which is probably between 8 and 8:30, give or take. But again, you might need to start a really long lead in to try and find that out. And then I suppose another point is that often we see a lot of resistance when they maybe don't feel they're getting enough of us, and this is often possible within a busy household, that the competition of needs is high and our children don't get that one-to-one interaction with us as much as they might need. That will never be on purpose, because we're all doing our best, and I totally know that. But again, because she's signaling, and we're remembering that all behavior makes sense, but I would just try and make sure that we're creating opportunities for connection on a one-to-one basis, even if that's just bursts of time, that we're incorporating play into the day, that you're then also using the wake time, light exposure, in order to help regulate your pattern, and then your eating structure, then your long wind in, as I've described tonight, may all help you begin to make a change in the right direction.
Okay, and the best, some ideas around the way to comfort a child who's struggling with bad dreams and nightmares, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I suppose the bad dream and the nightmare, first of all, we have to understand that they're developmental, and whatever our children are being exposed to, what they're hearing, what they're seeing, they need to process those things, and they often process those things as part of their sleep. But I guess we always look at sleep hygiene being one way of maybe trying to dilute whatever that vulnerability is. I'll always comfort children from the bedside. I will always be available to them. I will verbally respond. I will physically respond to them, and I will work through whatever it is that they're experiencing. I will always be curious about seeing, could I get them to sleep earlier? Could I get them more sleep? Could I create a setting that prepares for a peaceful bedtime transition? And as a result of that, do I then see a knock-on impact of a reduced dynamic for bad dreams? So I always want to comfort, but I also want to see, can I get behind why that is happening for them as well? I have seen countless times in my practice, even just too much sugar in the diet, leaving us more vulnerable to that dynamic as well. And again, I'm going to reiterate it. I'm a parent at the cold face, but those things often sneak in and we're not completely aware of them. Same with screen time, too much screen time, screens too close to sleep time. They all leave us a little bit vulnerable to some of the sleep disturbances that parents report.
Thanks, Lucy. What I should say is, in your general talk there, Lucy, you covered a huge amount of ground, as you did previously. I mean, you cover an awful lot of ground, and sometimes it's possibly even difficult to take everything in. So as I said in the kind of little note at the top, I'll be putting up a recording of the session online.
And I have to say that I was a bit thrown myself with thinking that maybe the connection wasn't good enough, and so I probably was a little bit rattled. I'm going to be 100% honest. So I hope it was I hope it was made enough, it was, consistent enough for people. And I have seen a couple of questions come in, Emmett, and I'll just jump in on one or two of them, actually, because one question is about a light in the bedroom or light. So I did mention earlier that lots of sleep professionals and specialists recommend, super dark, but I know that that isn't often how a child's brain, yes, it's what the brain ultimately needs from a sleep perspective, but sometimes from a security perspective, too dark can be very disconcerting for a young child. So I nearly always begin with a night light, and I often begin with a string of fairy lights. And I know that lots of different literature, you will find that not recommended, but I'm very practical about how can we help our children feel more safe and secure. And then if we need to, we can start to wean those things back. So often an LED fairy light on a battery will slowly dim anyway. And as a result of that, your child will start to sleep in a much darker environment. But what I do recommend is that we try and avoid hall lights, bathroom lights, ensuite lights, because they don't help the brain and the sleep. So I'm trying to look at what could we use, like a night light, or like I said, the LED string of lights, in an effort to help our children still feel safe and secure and still promote a sleep-inducing environment.
And I have a question here about sleep quality, Lucy. How to improve the sleep quality for my child. I have a child who has very low levels of deep sleep compared to his brother.
And I suppose this often happens because we're measuring it on something, like on a watt, on a watt. I suppose I don't know if we're really accurately measuring, if I'm 100% honest with you. I guess I know there's an accuracy in it, so don't get me wrong. I'm a realist. I understand that there's a measure and we can use that, but I often feel that it's not necessarily accurate as it could be. All right. I think first of all, we measure quality of sleep by quality and quantity of sleep by mood and behavior. Do they seem well rested? Are they appearing well rested? And if they are not, then I would start to get curious around why is the quality of sleep not great for this particular child. I wouldn't be interested in graphs from a watch, okay? But I am interested in the day-to-day cold face stuff. Do they seem like they're getting the same amount of sleep as I'm giving them? And then I might say, what impacts quality of sleep? Diet, what we're eating, what we're drinking, okay? Overuse of screens. These things impact the quality of sleep, and they stop the brain going into the deep restoring function that you're talking of. But before I'd rely on what's on the watch, I would look and see, does he seem like he's getting enough sleep, and does it measure up to what he's giving and getting?
Okay, just one here. Weighted blankets. Have you come across this idea?
I have done, yeah. And I suppose I feel there is a place for everything once we're making informed decisions, and that we all have a sensory profile. And part of the sensory profile for some of us might be that we like the idea of something heavy on us. And that's where the weighted blanket has come from. So it's like a cuddle technology, for want of a better description, Emmett. I think it's really important that if you're going to go down the weighted blanket route, that you do so and you do it correctly, so you get your child's weight and you order a weighted blanket that is personalized and individualized for them, because that's how that context works. But if you're in any doubt about anything we've talked about tonight, especially when I touched briefly on anything underlying, always have a discussion with your GP or your health visitor as well. And again, your occupational therapist around the weighted blanket if you're in any doubt. But I think I'm open to exploring things. I saw another mention about a salt lamp in the bedroom. I'm not about a salt lamp itself, but I am a big fan of the salt air purifier, because there's a distinction between the two. What I find in my practice when people have salt lamps in the bedroom, we see the children being quite thirsty. And so I'm aware of the properties of the salt lamp, but at the cold face, I see thirst as being part of that. So I normally take out the salt lamp, but I do like the salt air purifier.
Can I ask one here about mindfulness pre-bed? Can you recommend any mindfulness tools, sites pre-sleep? 12-year-old who thinking too much of his day in his, before bed. Is jotting down thoughts for older kids a good idea to empty their mind of worries, etc.?
Yes, and I'm sorry, I did say I was a little bit disjointed because I was thrown before we started and I needed to change my device, and that meant I couldn't see my slides as well as I needed to tonight. However, I obviously do recommend, breathing exercises, body scan exercises, guided meditation. I'm not going to make specific recommendations in terms of apps to use. I think it's important to go and look and see what feels right for you as a parent. But I know that there are lots of choices out there and ones that would be really helpful. I try to keep things really simple, and I'm going to include with the slides some breathing exercises and a body scan as well. And then, of course, there are some lovely books on meditation. And often we can do meditation with our children, or you can record them and they can listen to them. And it's just about really trying to kind of stay curious and open. What else is going to help here? Yes, writing things down. Yes, posting the worries away. But I'm very aware that sometimes those techniques, they're not helpful enough. If we've got high levels of anxiety, and if our children are really struggling, and I'll be a big advocate of looking for, professional support to kind of enmesh with everything you're hearing here tonight as well. Because sometimes we can't do it on our own.
Thanks, Lucy. Okay, young child, 5-year-old, can get to sleep by himself, but regularly waking up between 3 and 4 and coming into the bedroom, rarely sleeps so fully overnight on his own.
Great. The good news is that at 5, he absolutely can. Does that make sense to you? That, as when we have babies, we have that big question, can they or can't they? Are they able to yet? And again, it's developmental, as we spoke about earlier. By 5, we absolutely know that they are able to consolidate their sleep. But there are often things that are in the way. The late bedtime is one of them. Okay, the parent here describes the child being able to get to sleep themselves, which is really positive. But I'm always curious when I still hear about nighttime waking. So I often think that maybe sometimes drinks are part of the bedtime process. And if they are, that might be leaving you more vulnerable to nighttime activity. But sometimes nighttime activity is just there because it's been there. It's historic. So your child has almost like a muscle memory of when I wake, I get up and I come into your bed. And that's, I come in, I sleep with you, or you put me back and I come back in again. When we're helping our children consolidate their nighttime sleep in the bed or the room that we have designated for them, we do need to support them back to sleep there. We might need to do that for up to 3 weeks, to help ingrain that idea of this is your place of sleep and this is how you stay asleep through the course of the night. And that's where the stay and support approach comes into play. But I always say that any sleep learning exercise like the stay and support or, an interval visit, it only works if the backstory supports it. And the backstory is the timings, the regularity, the diet, the exercise. It's everything else behind it supporting what we're hoping for.
Okay, here's a tough one. Difficult case, I suppose, but a 12-year-old taking up to 3 hours, occasionally more, to fall asleep. She doesn't have a phone, goes to bed at 8:45. She's had a bath, reading, tried avoiding sugary foods, including fruit, close to bedtime. I lie beside her, she sleeps a bit quicker, but not always. She was an excellent sleeper from age 3 in her 3 months in her own room, but the last 2 years, really, really terrible. She tried melatonin, kitty jellies, and any advice? Tried chamomile tea. It doesn't like the taste.
I know, and my heart goes out to.
Sorry.
Yeah, so difficult. And I suppose the first thing I might do is, you say she's taking 3 hours to get to sleep, so that would probably indicate to me that there's a time flashing all the time. There's a time that she's falling asleep by every night. So that might be. I don't know what the mum said there, Emma. Did she say she starts at 8:30, and so that means she's asleep at work?
Yeah.
What does that mean then? She's asleep by what, 11:45?
I guess, yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing I might do is start doing bedtime an hour before 11:45. Okay, and start making bedtime easier. because the frustration that comes with being there for 3 hours is really hard for both of you, whereas if we could build in some habits to begin with, where you have a regular wake time, no later than 7:30 a.m. That's really, really important, okay? Because that if we don't have a regular wake time rather, every day, 7 days of the week, makes bedtime elusive. So what I would start with is the late bedtime, and start your process the hour before, an hour and 15 minutes before, so you can do that wind down that we talked about, plus the bedtime routine, and then the lights out time that actually corresponds with the time she currently gets to sleep. Okay. And then what you're doing is you're shrinking how long it's taking. And then when that becomes a little bit more established, then you can start to do things 15 minutes earlier, 30 minutes earlier, and gradually move bedtime earlier. Now, you would probably need to look at, is there stress and anxiety undercutting this? Is it the wake time? We talked, your mom has mentioned there that, you're doing the sleep hygiene pieces. So that's really good. But just see now about the emotional piece and, the connection piece. And look, when I talk about connection, I know how hard it is to give our kids everything that they need, because they need a lot and they seem to need more the older they get. Okay. But just keep factoring it in, working into it, in making them feel that seen, heard, and belonging and loved in your family section, in your family unit. And then just keep promoting things as best as you possibly can. I hope that shrinkage of time would, if you push it out and then you just start bringing it forward one more time once it's shrunk, that might be very helpful to both of you to take the pressure off where bedtime is concerned.
Thanks, Lucy. Here's one for you. Okay. Okay. My daughter's 11, nearly 12. She's always been anxious going to bed. Currently shares a room with her 6-year-old brother, but I'm looking to move her out of the room as she's getting too old to stay with her brother. Do you have any advice on how to make this transition go smoothly? She's reluctant to go to a room by herself. Come across that one?
Oh, I know. Yeah, it's hard, especially if, there's a little level of anxiety. Sorry, Emma, was there a level of anxiety about moving, but also was a level of anxiety anyway of being on her own?
Yeah. Well, it says that we've always been anxious about going to bed as well. So.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So I suppose the first things to do is maybe, start building in what we've talked about today. Very often we don't have a long enough onset of sleep. We don't have long enough initiation for sleep. Even as I say it out loud, it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Preparing for sleep an hour and a half before we want to turn the lights out. That feels like longer than we even did when they were babies. But sometimes when we get to these age groups, that's exactly what's needed, because they really need that entry. And you have to remember, we're dealing with so many pressures, extracurricular activities, oversubscribed homework, the social pressures. And I guess it's just trying to reduce it for them by engaging more deeply with them and giving them those opportunities to bring it down. And then I suppose with most children, I just try and get them involved in the changes that we're making. That if you start to describe, what are your motivations for putting her into her own room, and how could she learn to love her sleep with this older age group? We try to get them involved in why sleep's so important to them. So if, for example, she's like a budding athlete, then explaining to her that getting to sleep and staying and getting enough sleep is going to be so important to her, prowess on the sports field. If we can identify what would motivate them, then we can start to market sleep to them in a really positive way. The way that we have helped our children learn to eat healthily, to honor their fitness, to honor their, as our kids get older, their skincare, their teeth, So it's the same sort of premise, but you're really just trying to sell it and engage them with it and start to help them understand why it's so important and why it isn't a threatening thing to do, and why sleep isn't something to be resistant of, and why it is so positive, and all the positive things that it's going to do. It's going to grow your brain, it's going to grow your body, it's going to grow your hair, it's going to improve your skin, it's going to grow your muscles, and look what's not to love. It's a superpower.
Any question here about the clocks changing? I think there's always talk every year about that change. There's some talk next year maybe that we're going to not bother, but is there anything about that, the clocks changing? Is that very disruptive?
Well, I suppose that it challenges our biological rhythm, and it does put us at risk. And I just think that there has been talk of it changing. I think COVID got in the way of it, but it is there. It's listed to change. Okay. Of course, you know that when we lose the hour, when we gain an hour, as adults, we feel it. We feel the effects of it. And as a result of that, I suppose we know that it has an impact. Look, which goes to time zones, we go to the European cities, you know, we change around. It does challenge it, but I don't feel this. Yes, there's some evidence. Think more evidence of these RP things. They can have an impact. It gets the. Did I lose you, Emmett?
Yeah, thanks for that, Lucy. You got a bit choppy there again at the end. So I think, anyway, the time, and I said at the outset we were going to wrap things up at 1:15, and it's 1:15. I think we got to quite a lot of the questions that came in, not every single one, so apologies. We didn't get to cover everything that came in the chat, but I think we got a lot of it. Thank you once again, Lucy. A huge amount of ground covered. I think it really helped for an awful lot of people. And what I will do is I'll be putting a copy of a recording of this up on the Planet Youth website, probably on Friday. And I will also put a copy of our slides. And I think maybe your slides, Lucy, mentioned some additional stuff around food and different things. I think that will be helpful to people. So I'll put a copy of the 2 sets of slides, the recording. And what I'll do is, because I have the registration list, people sent their email in and so on into the registration list. So I'll send everybody just one more email when that link goes up to let you know. And I'll send a copy of that little booklet out to people as well in a PDF version. If you're not in a school in Galway, Mayo, or Roscommon, you probably wouldn't be getting them. Well, I guess you wouldn't be. So that's it. Thanks once again. Thank you, Lucy, for your expertise. And apologies to everybody if things were a little bit choppy with the tech from time to time. It's it's a bit disappointing with the webinar jam, but can't be helped. So good night, everyone, and enjoy Bake Off. Those of you who are getting to see the end of it or have it recording. We'll leave it there. Thanks once again, and good night.
Thank you.
Any last words from you, Lucy? Happy enough?
No, I'm good. Just a bit disappointed if it wasn't.
And thanks so much. Thanks so much once again. So good night, everybody.